Hello, my name is Heath Kirkendall. This is reflection number 2 for Race, Power, and Politics at SMU with Dr. Johnson. This reflection is specifically over the last month or so of readings that we've done and classroom discussions. I would like to apologize in advance. I have not been at some of those classes due to uh, district requirements, and a few of those classes just I think at least one of them I was out sick for, and I do apologize for that. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as I can so as to not take up too much of your time, seeing as my last recording was quite long. All right, let me go ahead and get started, I suppose. A couple things that I just wanted to note from our readings that stood out to me as interesting or unique. I very much liked reading about both of the court cases that we were discussing this time around, Plyler v. Doe and Lau v. Nichols. I enjoy listening to Supreme Court cases, hearing about Supreme Court cases, and discussing them. That's a topic that I find myself doing more and more as the Supreme Court becomes more and more insane. um, both of these cases are interesting to me because they tie into that idea of the fundamental right of education. I do believe education is a fundamental right, just like food, water, shelter, anything like that. If it is something that a human requires to live, to survive, and to grow and thrive in the world, then it is a fundamental right, or I would believe it should be. Education is part of that. We would not tell a child that we will not teach them to learn or speak or write or something like that. So why would we say that that is something that they don't require? We expect it of our citizens to be able to write, learn, speak. We need to make sure that all children are being given that right one way or the other. And of course, the country has more or less failed on that at this point. And for basically all of its history, at least all of its history with education. I wanted to point out a couple things about the cases in particular that I found interesting. I thought both of them were interesting in that from a first glance, they seem to be proactive cases. They seem to be saying, all right, well, here's what we need to do. Here's how we will make the education system better. But in fact, both of these cases are reactionary. They are both being brought up only because of laws or school initiatives that have been brought up as possibly being unconstitutional, and then the court reacts to them saying yes or no. And in this case, they both times are siding with the plaintiffs, saying that no, these laws are not constitutional. You must throw them aside. While that is all well and good, I do think that it is indicative of, one, the Supreme Court's tendency to only be reactionary because that is how they function. They are not like the legislature. They cannot be proactive, not in the same way at least, which is in some ways for the best. But also how the way that we treat education is very often reactive. We say to ourselves, all right, well, what problems are there, and we will work to fix them. But in working to fix those, we usually only plug in the gaps. We don't actually try to fill in something to build further out. It's as if we're trying to build a bridge across a canyon, and every time we have a brick fall out as we're building, we say, okay, hold on really quick, and we slap a new brick into place there, but we don't put anything to connect it to the next bit. So when the bridge crumbles again and again and again, yes, we are slowly pushing our way forward, but it is so slow because we are not actually putting any of the connective tissue in there to build it up. That is something that is true, I think, of America in many cases. It seems like very often, whether it's civil rights, education, environmental reforms, anything like that, these are all done in grand sweeping motions, huge laws or bills that seem to try to reimagine the way that we work our systems. And while I suppose that feels nice, the attempt to reimagine the system, it does seem odd that that seems to be the only way we can get things done. We don't like doing incremental change. We like doing big sweeping change. When it seems to me that we need to be doing that incremental change as well. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck in cycles like we are now, where our minimum wage does not rise even as productivity and cost of living does. And then when we finally decide to try to raise it again, it's this huge jump because, oops, we didn't raise it up since a few decades ago. Those are just some brief thoughts on the cases. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the housing and redlining discussions we had a few weeks back. It was very interesting to look at a map of redlining to see the actual areas in Dallas that had been redlined, to see explicitly them saying these are areas with poor black families, or these are middle class areas with Jewish families, or these are rich white areas, and specifically saying like why those areas are preferable or desirable for loans or not. It's especially interesting, of course, to see how current day politics map onto those redlining maps. Uh, my school, of course, falls within a redlined area in Oak Cliff, since most of Oak Cliff was redlined, since it is a predominantly minority community. And so it's interesting to see how that redlining ties right back in to school funding. If an area is deemed to be less profitable, if it is deemed to be less worthy of having any money brought into it, then of course for funding the schools, since we fund those by property taxes usually, there will be less money to go to the schools as well. If the schools have less money, they will have less resources to use. If they have less resources to use, the school becomes worse, the education becomes worse, the opportunities for people who are educated there grow worse, and as such, the area is put into a constant cycle of poverty and of low educational attainment. Of course, we know people break out of those cycles, but we need to be thinking about this less on a micro level with just a few people breaking out, but trying to elevate the entirety of those areas. I think this is interesting. This is very interesting to me because I think it is an underlying system that is built there purposefully to keep poor communities poor. To make sure that they are not getting high levels of education, because with that high level of education, they may be able to, first and foremost, may be able to vote and change the outcomes of elections, which might give them people in power who will be amenable to them or will want to help them. And of course, those in charge right now don't want that in any way. But also the idea that if those people gain an education, they will likely be able to gain more money, they'll have more skills, generally maybe a better station in life, and as such they can use that as leverage to make their community better. And people do not want these communities to be better because of that baked in racism that resides in almost all aspects of American law. Um, One final thing I wanted to discuss as well, something that I had an interesting viewpoint shared with me when we were in class just a couple of weeks ago, discussing the. Oh, I am so sorry. The title of the document has slipped my mind. You know what? I can pull it up though. I can pull it up. It's right here on my screen. So, where are you? There you are. Okay. Nation at Risk. Nope. Nation at Risk is the other one. Case for National Action. I apologize for that. But the Case for National Action. Reading over that document, seeing those blatantly white supremacist viewpoints being spouted off as if they are progressive or liberal to some degree. I remember discussing in class how wild I found that. How was this man just so blatantly white supremacist, or was he just that much of an absolute idiot? And that it had become so baked into him that he could look at it and say, yes, this is progressive. I thought it was very interesting then what one of my classmates said, where she had said the way that he is acting is how I would expect most older white men from that generation to act, to be that open with it, to be that mask off about their hatred and their bigotry. And that's very interesting to me. I think because often in my family, I have seen people like cover that and not want to put that forward, or at least not be able to word it so succinctly that they can get their point across. But I do know that it is there in many of those people, whether they'd like to admit it or not. It was not a viewpoint I had thought of before, and I think it shows those differences in how white Americans are raised versus how black Americans are raised, where black Americans are forced to contend with racism on a daily basis, and white Americans are able to cover it up and are able to look the other way on it. Well, of course, this person is old and odd. He must be stupid and racist and whatnot. But for Black Americans, that is the average white person for them in many ways. That is the average person who's in charge and trying to change the country to hurt them more. Um, I think that is. I feel like that thought has crossed my mind before, but it was nice to have that discussion again, at least for a little bit there. Yeah, it's fun to have new viewpoints brought forward and be reminded that what I have experienced is, of course, very, very much just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the human experience. Um, I'm always excited to learn a little bit more about that. Um, yes, I think that is where my thoughts are at this point. Um, Most of what we have been reading and what we have been discussing has really just been reaffirming for me that it is nearly impossible to fix the education system, because to fix the education system would mean to fix everything else. Um, the system the cycles that we have built around our education system can only be torn down and replaced with something better if we can step out of the hegemony that we're in right now. As long as white supremacist laws are able to stay in place and are able to affect that system, we can't change it. And as long as the lawmakers who are there, who create those laws, are in place, we cannot change it. And as long as the courts who uphold those laws are there, we will not be able to change it. And so it is a constant reminder that as a single teacher, there is very little I can do on the macro scale, and thus I have to focus on the micro for now and focus on building the students up and doing what we can for them. Um, yes, that's where I am right now. I apologize. This did still go a little longer than I had wanted, but that will be my reflection. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in class.